Hello and bienvenue. I'm your host Anaïs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Her Career, Her Coach, the podcast dedicated to empowering women to build a career they are truly passionate about. Full disclosure, this episode has been 5 years in the making. Not to say has been actively in the making, but Shola was one of the first person I met when I was looking to start my own coaching journey and practice as a full-time entrepreneur. And I do vividly remember from her talk that she was just truly an inspiring person to be around. So I could not thank her enough for accepting my invitation to come onto the podcast. I know today's episode is going to be a special one, at least for me. Welcome, Shola. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Anna. It's so nice to be here with you.
Fantastic. So again, I'm very lucky because I already know a lot about you. But for anyone who's just meeting you today, would that be okay to share a little bit more about you and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm the author of a couple of books on communication, and I work as a professional speaker, keynote speaker, and also I run sessions for companies on inclusion in the workplace, on empathy and leadership primarily, and also, of course, on communication. So that's what keeps me busy during the day. And sometimes the evening, because I've got lots of clients in America too. So yeah, long days sometimes.
Amazing. I mean, all of these topics actually dear to my heart. I'd love to dive a little bit more into the core of what you do. But before I do that, what is it that you love the most about what you do?
Oh gosh, I love the fact that first of all, they're important topics, right? So
Mm,
even things like communicating more powerfully, it can change your life, right? Or
mm.
change your career. Obviously, inclusion is hugely important, and it's good to see that many workplaces are changing and they're really becoming more equitable. So it's exciting to be involved in that. And I've always had an interest in personal development, as I say, communication. So it's just quite a lovely thing to be able to take chunks of information that I've found helpful or things that I've personally found useful and then kind of synthesize them with other content and then create something new that will, whether it's helping a workplace or an individual. So I guess there's an element of creativity in order to empower people. That word's kind of overused, but in order to help people change their lives, let's say.
Oh, that is exciting. And I feel like if my memory is right, the workshop I attended when you were obviously leading and speaking, I think it was definitely around public speaking. So it looks like communication has been one of the topics that you've been focusing on and talking a lot about over the years. And I know, for example, with the work that I do with my clients, communicating exactly either what is it that you need or making sure the message gets conveyed in the right way is sometimes quite of a challenge. Obviously, the end of the podcast is very much around any recommendation that you have, for anyone looking to make the most out of their career. But I feel like I have to dive into there just now, especially because of the core of what you do. What would you say have been the either challenges or the main focus that you've been working on when it comes to tackling communication, either challenges or the key elements that you share when it comes to either companies or people that you work with who are looking to improve on their communication skills?
I think a lot of it is around, we always hear around confidence, but I'm a big one for giving people like little formulas or frameworks that they can use to help them to be successful in different situations. And I know early on in my career, I really struggled to communicate. So I was one of those very quiet people. I'm an introvert anyway. And in my first corporate job, I had a manager that he would see me sort of struggling in meetings, not speaking up. And instead of being given support, eventually what happened was I was put on probation and told that I'd
Oh,
be,
wow.
yeah,
No.
and so it kind of made me realize how important it is to be able to share your ideas, hold your ground. So, I mean, that's partly why I do what I do. The number of people, you read people's books and they say, oh, when I was able to speak up concisely in meetings or really share my opinion, really get my point across, then everything changed. I think the challenge that I had early on in my career has obviously led to what I'm doing now. And it's great when people say, like you said that you remember a workshop from many years ago, or I was speaking at a conference just recently and somebody came up and said, well, I learned some frameworks. And then now in my job, people come and they watch me in meetings. They come to my meeting so that they can see me in action. And she said, I couldn't have done that without having these frameworks. So just little things. I mean, often we feel like we have to read these long books and they're full of academic research or whatever, but it can just be something, a little 3-line framework, or so short, but that is enough to really make a change. So for me, it's about bringing those like really small but powerful tools to people's attention so that they can really do the best that they can, whether as individuals or whether it's people in a meeting at work. We've all been in meetings where it's hard to cut through, or no one's listening, or there's 1 or 2 people that are just kind of grandstanding. It's like they're on a play, delivering a soliloquy in a play, like, oh, look at me, blah blah blah. And it's really hard to kind of be noticed in those scenarios. So it's just helping people to be visible really in those situations.
Oh, I mean, I love this. I mean, I'm gonna cut the last probably 2 or 3 minutes where you shared this to share it with all of my clients, because I was literally having a conversation with one of my clients this morning. She was saying that it's really hard for her to be assertive. She's in an environment where it's very sort of male dominated, but also quite senior in terms of who they are first, and therefore how they work and function. And obviously change is very much not necessarily pushed through actively in the organization and so on. Anyhow, just hearing you talking about your experience, and obviously we're going to dive into the different career challenges, but also achievement that you've had. I feel like it's really empowering, because essentially, even if I may put it this way, but it's definitely not the right way to put it, even if you're an introvert, you have managed to find a way that works for you. And I'm just going to scrap the even if, because whoever you are, however you identify in terms of either personality or gender or non-gender, I feel like there is always a right way that works for you. And like you said, I think it's about finding the right framework. And I mean, like you said, it's about finding practical things that you can put into practice. So whoever is listening to the podcast, whoever thinks they're too much of an introvert, or they're just not the right way of communication because this is not what is expecting of them, then there is just something that you need to crack that you haven't cracked yet that will work for you. If I may put it this way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think it's everybody's got their quite often it's something that you could see as a weakness can be a strength. And for me, for example, when I first started, I knew I wanted to be a speaker, and I thought, well, gosh, I love to share things that are valuable, but I don't like to just be up there talking just for the sake of talking.
Mm-hmm.
And so early on, I was thinking, well, how can I add value to the audience and not have to be the one who's the center of attention the whole time? So I started to devise exercises or opportunities for people to share with their partner. It might be a keynote with hundreds of people, but I might still say, oh, well, turn to your partner and discuss X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
And it was initially a way for me to deflect attention away from myself. But then what started to happen was people were saying, oh, thank you, I so loved this opportunity to speak, or I met somebody, we're going to stay in touch, we're going to be friends now, we were strangers before. And so this way of deflecting attention from myself that has become a strength for me, and people will book me because they say, well, you do these interactive sessions, don't you, where everyone can talk and get to know each other. So quite often it's about finding what works for you, and then that can be your point of strength or the point of originality for yourself, or whatever it might be, MO that people remember you for.
I love it. The fact that you've started to talk about yourself, what you do, how you do it, and how you came to do it, and not necessarily saying you need to do X, Y, and Z, but like you said, you just have to find the way that works for you. It's exactly, I mean, there was no right or wrong answer in this podcast, don't get me wrong, but I feel like this is exactly the kind of thing that I want anyone who's listening to this episode today to remember. There is no right or wrong way. You just have to find the one that works for you. On that note, I know I've been very much nosy and curious, so thank you so much for allowing me to go there and just dive a little bit more into what you do. Let's have a look at your career achievements, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because what might be from the outside an achievement for that individual might be something much more kind of unusual. True. But I think for me, a career achievement, good question. I think in part writing the 2 books. I've written 3, but the third one I still need to get it out there. But writing those books was an achievement for me, just
Yeah.
because I don't particularly enjoy having to sit down and write. And it's funny because everyone now uses social media, and I kind of can be reluctant because I think, oh gosh, what if it's not worded right? What if I, whereas there's so many people out there who can just grab the phone and just like, and then there's this great looking post immediately out there. So I think for me, yeah, it's about the writing of the books is one, because it's a way to get to many more people. And people have come up and said, oh, I read your book, How to Be a Diva at Public Speaking, or the second book actually, which was called Big Talk, Small Talk. And that was more of a book that was kind of pitched. It was a communication book, but more kind of simple general communication. And I've had people say, well, I have Asperger's, or I have, some kind of, I've got some neurodiverse condition. And it's been really helpful for me to understand how I should be communicating with people around me. So I think writing the books has been an achievement for me. So that's one. Let's see, the second one. I think having the guts to be self-employed, or to at least change my career. Because early on, when I did a master's degree and I had no idea, I was kind of just blowing in the wind in terms of what I wanted to do. I had quite controlling father who always kind of said, right, you either need to be a teacher, or if you're a teacher, you can follow your husband wherever he goes, and just very old antiquated ideas. So it took me a while to kind of break free from his sort of conditioning, if you like. And at first I thought I had to have like a more conventional career, and then eventually I realized, well, what I was doing wasn't working for me at the time. So I think it was just to have the courage to say, okay, let me just see what I'm doing here. I was a singer. I was a professional singer for about 9 years.
Oh, yes, I remember actually. Yes, true. Okay. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, no problem. So to go from doing corporate work to then thinking, okay, well, my heart right now is saying that I need to follow this singing thing. That to me, I think, was also an achievement. And although I'm not doing it now, I think sometimes it's just having the guts to take a step in an unknown direction, or you're not sure where things are going. And it's, I think, in part through having the confidence to sing and perform in front of audiences, that's helped me now as a speaker. Because if you're singing, you're trying to sing on key or remember lyrics, that is so much harder than delivering a speech where at least you can say anything. You don't have to sing in speaking key or anything. So that has kind of given me a tougher exterior, ready to be in front of audiences for speaking. So I'd say that's the second one. And then the third achievement, I would say, is making a living as a speaker, because there are so many people who want to speak, and it's hard to break through, and it's hard to even to choose what topic you're going to speak on, and find a way to have that balance between you sharing and then the audience getting value. Because you get some people who want to speak because they kind of, they want to, as I say, grandstand. It's all about me. I want to, be seen on the stage. So it's about having that balance between giving value, providing value, but doing what you need to do to be respected as a speaker in front of the audience. So I'd say those are my 3. Sorry, they came out a bit meandering style.
No, not at all. I love it, actually. And if I may just unpack, especially the first one, when it comes to the books, I feel like, if that's okay, we'll include the reference of those books as part of the podcast details. When did you write the first one?
So the first book I wrote, I think it was back in 2017. And I was working with a coach at the time. He was a sort of business / career coach. And I knew I wanted to be a speaker, and a lot of speakers have written books. So I said, okay, well, I think I'm going to find a way to write a business book. He said, no, before you do that, you need to write a book that shares something about you and about your life. And so that's how to Be a Diva at Public Speaking came through, because I just transitioned from singing. So the diva connection was there, but the diva is also a speaking framework. So it kind of was a play on the word diva. And so, yeah, that was the first book, and I self-published it. And I'm proud of that book, certainly. And it's kind of all the stuff that's in there is what I've used personally to help me become a professional speaker. So that was the first one. And then the second book was picked up. I guess they saw the first book. It was a publishing house. They saw the first book and then approached me to write the second book. So it was kind of a hybrid publishing model where I was paid to write the book, but I also had to do some of the promotion of the book as well. And so that book, they kind of told me what they wanted me to write, and it was along the right lines, communication and so on. So yeah, the first book. So if anyone out there is ever thinking of writing a book, there's nothing wrong with self-publishing, because that can lead to other opportunities for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you've shared that. So definitely you are a woman of many talents. And I love the fact that we've talked about your journey from the corporate world, if I may put it this way, and then going into the singing and then the public speaking. How many careers did you have?
Oh gosh, don't get me started.
Okay, this is a 2-hour long podcast, people. Brace yourself.
Well, when I was born at the age of 0. No, it was no, probably 3 or 4, I guess. If you and and I think it's, especially from a careers perspective, because sometimes we feel that everything should be a straight line. You can connect the dots. This leads to that, that leads to this, blah blah blah. And then when things go off course, we feel like we're a failure or things are going wrong. And I remember when after I had my corporate career, and then I was working in the USA for a few years, and then I came back to the UK and I had another job for 6 months. And after 6 months, they decided they would let me go because there was some market conditions. And also, again, being an introvert, they said I wasn't speaking up enough in meetings. So I remember for a period, I would just be lying in bed at night, just crying, like, oh, all my friends from university are doing this. My parents expect me to have done that. And here I am. I've got no direction. I've got no job. What am I doing? So I would just be literally just crying myself to sleep. And I can laugh now, but any of you out there who are struggling in terms of the next step, you just have to have confidence that you will eventually find something for you that will at least help you take the next step. And then you take the next step and the next step. And sometimes the direction is all over the place. It's not, A to B, it's like A to C to D to wherever back to, but I think all we can do is do the next best thing that's available to us at that moment, and then trust that our heart, our intuition is guiding us in the right direction. Because for me, when I look back now, a lot of the things that I did, whether it's being a singer, being fired from job, that the second job, being put on probation, all those things add to what I'm currently doing, because these are stories that I can tell. This is confidence that I've gained. So I almost feel like no experience is a waste. So never, savor the experiences that you've had, even if they're not the ones that you were asking for in that moment. There can still be some value and some gold to be found in those times.
I could not agree more. I don't know where this is going next, but I have to say this is on my shortlist as the snippet of the episode I'll be sharing across social media, because what you said here is definitely priceless and spot on. It's hard sometimes because, a lot of things that either life or work or a manager throw at you could feel like it's just a curveball and you will never be able to go back up from it. But actually, sometimes this is the best thing that could happen to you, not in the, present moment, but like you said, reflecting back and actually making this part of your journey and owning that journey, and then using this to the best you can do in terms of either like telling your story next or actually working on that side of things if this is something that you want to work on. I mean, I just love it. I've been mumbling around, but thank you very much for sharing. And I feel like you've actually nicely opened the door to the next chapter of the conversation, which is all about what would be your top 3 career challenges.
Yeah, I think, I think the first one is what I shared. So I'll kind of lump them together. So there was the period where I was put on probation at one company, and then I've turned that around eventually, and then went to another company, and then after 6 months I was fired. So those are definitely challenges for me. And I remember the day that I was fired, I just walked out of the office and I thought, I could apply for another job. And then instantly my confidence was so low. Something said, no, you can't, you're not valuable in the workplace. Forget it. Who would want you?
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And I remember that time so vividly. And it was interesting because I just really thought I was sort of unemployable. And that's what led me to think, well, okay, I need to be self-employed. I need to find something to do, that's not nothing to do with corporate. So that's when I went on the kind of personal development journey, trained to be a coach, trained to be a singer, all these sorts of things. So, and those have really helped me. So it's almost like out of the depths, the darkness came, just opportunity, because I thought I had no alternative. So I would say that was the first challenge for me. I think another one was just sort of in the period where I left corporate, was feeling, kind of unemployable. I'd been singing for a while and I knew I loved singing, but it wasn't the thing. And I would literally just be so frustrated and so upset that I just didn't know what the next step was. Like, I kind of was reading books about speakers and I kind of thought, oh, this could be interesting, but I just didn't believe that I could be a speaker. And I remember just waking up every day and just saying, well, why am I here? What value am I
Mm.
adding to the world? And that was a really kind of quite a sort of wretched time, because I think no one wants to feel that they're not useful or that they don't have value. So that was definitely a challenge. And especially having grown up with parents who are very much, because my parents are African, Nigerian, and quite often there's the, like, you need to be a doctor, accountant, lawyer.
Hmm.
You need to be in a profession. So knowing that that hadn't worked for me, and that I'd disappointed my parents, but also didn't even know what it was that I should be doing next. So that was a real kind of low point, I would
Yeah.
say. So that was another one. And then I think a third one was kind of, as I knew I wanted to be a speaker, kind of transitioning. And at the beginning, I was kind of doing part B2B. So I was kind of coaching, doing like a speaker coaching for women. And then at the same time, I was doing, I had a website that was kind of multi-purpose. So I was trying to hedge my bet. So there's some kind of speaker coaching stuff, and there's some corporate stuff as well. And I was thinking, well, whoever bites at the content, then I'll know which direction. And I was finding that when you do B2B, like all the social media, the posting, I was finding it very draining,
Hmm.
because as an introvert, I kind of don't always want to share everything that I'm doing.
Of course.
And I guess luckily for me, what happened, I started to get some corporate interest, and more and more and more. And so that kind of showed me that that was the direction. But there was a period for a while where I was really like, well, what's going to happen? Where is this going to go? So that was quite a challenging time as well.
Yeah. And how did you navigate that uncertainty back then?
And it's hard. I'd read,
Mm.
I'd do a lot of reading, whether it's absorbing kind of coaching content, the self-help books to kind of bolster the ego. So yeah, I was just reading a lot of books about business, about self-help, about confidence, just to try and stay positive, really. And then I was changing my website like every day, like, no, put this, change it, to see if I put this one word, is that going to make a difference? So yeah, it was an interesting time, let's say.
100%. But I'm glad that you shared that. And obviously, I'm going to save some questions toward the end to ask some additional either tips or even resources, maybe some of those books that you've read back then that, have helped you. We'll look at that. Before we do that, I also have seen a lot of my clients struggle when it comes to the expectations from their family. They are coming from a background a little bit like what you shared about yours, where family has a huge sort of like influence in terms of you have to be a doctor, you have to go through a PhD, and I feel like there is that part of them that is very much struggling of the fear of disappointment, but at the same time they know they're not necessarily true to themselves if they stay into that path. So I'm just curious to know, how did you navigate that journey back then when you had a similar experience?
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest with my family, I often wouldn't, with my parents in particular, because I knew what their response would be a lot of the time. So I would not share with them. I would
Mm.
do my own thing. Like, even with singing, I was a singer for many years before I even told them that I was singing, because I knew. And they want the best for their families, right? So it's kind of part fear driven, sometimes a little bit about control as well, an
Yeah.
expectation, because they're used to thinking certain careers are high profile and, safe. And then, you come along and say, no, I want to be a singer. Right. Of course, they're going to start making a bit of noise, right? So I just found that for me, the easiest way was just to keep doing what I was doing without sharing, because I
Okay.
didn't really need the pushback at that stage. And then later on, once you've had some success, or you've got a bit of, you've established yourself a little bit, then it was easier for me to go back and say, well, look, I just went to Russia to sing. Here's the video. And they're like, oh, amazing, because they don't see all the steps in between.
Hmm.
So they don't have to go on that scary journey with you. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that's the best way to deal with it. Everyone's different, depends on your
Hmm.
relationship. But for me, to have the confidence to continue forward in my own direction, I just needed to kind of double down and only share with people who would encourage me rather than those who would doubt me.
And I feel like this is already touching base on the last part, which is all about recommendation. And like you said, everyone does things differently, but I'm glad that you shared how you navigated yours, because that could be one way to continue on that journey, progress, make the next steps, but in a way that's comfortable to you. And like you said, share what is it that you feel comfortable sharing. Thank you very much. I'm so glad that you shared these challenges. And like you said, I feel like everyone has to find their own way of navigating with potential challenges of the different conversation that they might have either with the family or with people. But like you said, I think it's a matter of surrounding yourself with the people who are supportive, where you feel like you are being pushed in the right direction, and then share whenever it is that you want to share, whenever you're ready. On that note, talking about sharing, I'd love to dive a little bit more in terms of the core of the work that you do now. And I know obviously some of it is focusing around empathy at work, but also inclusive leadership and communication. So I'm just going to give the floor back to you, because I would just love, I mean, selfishly speaking, personally, but I know I'm sure the audience is going to benefit a lot from it as well, to know more about the work that you're focusing on in that area, and any specific either key messages or a key theme that we need to keep in mind if we want to bring more empathy at work, for example.
Yes, thank you for asking, Elise. I would say with the empathy at work, I mean, to be honest, it's interesting that empathy is a big topic now in the working world, because you would kind of think that empathy is just a basic skill that we should all have. And,
True.
like, why should this be this phenomenon, Well, what's going on? What are humans about, right? But yeah, I mean, I guess sometimes it needs to be really pointed out to people that it's not about necessarily centering yourself first, but about understanding what other people are trying to achieve or what their values are, so that we can create a world that's harmonious, equitable, where everyone has opportunities. And there's a very old book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
Yep.
and by Stephen Covey. And one of the habits is seek first to understand, then be understood. And I think if we can, that has so many different uses, because if you think about conflict, the idea that you would first ask the person that you've got a disagreement with to explain, well, where are you coming from? I'm curious, what's going on with you? And then they explain in a non-defensive way, but they can explain, and you just sit and listen, and then you respond, having taken their opinion into, their position into account. I mean, so often we don't, me included, I'm not saying I'm perfect, right? But we can jump to conclusions, we make assumptions, we forget to be curious, we forget to ask people what's going on for them. And, it takes me back to very early in my career. So with that first manager who put me on probation, so he clearly was assuming, because I wasn't speaking up much, and,
Mm.
He was assuming that, okay, either Shola doesn't have the intellect to do the job, or she's lazy, right?
Mm.
And, if he'd just said to me, well, what, I can see that you're struggling a bit. What's your perspective here? And I'd said, well, you know what, I'm really finding it a bit hard to make the transition from studying to the workplace, or, just share whatever. I'm struggling to be a British woman in this American workplace, whatever it might be. That would have just saved a lot of heartache, because I'm sure from there, they put me on probation, but I'm sure it wasn't easy, or they thought, oh gosh, we've got to have that conversation with Shola. It's not, even when people are telling you tough things, it's not necessarily easy for them, right? So
Yeah.
isn't it easier to ask a question, to be curious? And so that's really what empathy is founded upon, just making sure that we have that mutual understanding. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where the empathy side of things comes from. and where my interest in it arose from. And then inclusive leadership, communication. Well, communication, as I said, is really, as somebody who never was able to speak up and really found, she struggled in the workplace, all these little communication frameworks and tips and tricks are really helpful to me, and great to see that they're helpful to others. So that's been a thread through the work that I do, because I think communication is like the oil, it's like the lubrication of so much, right? I think that's always going to be there. And then inclusive leadership, again, if I go back to that experience with my manager, he was a young white guy. I was a, younger than him, Black woman. And I think he probably felt quite uncomfortable sort of around me, didn't really know how to manage me. So again, just how can we be more inclusive as leaders so that everybody feels that they can flourish, they can do well, they can be their best self, regardless of who they're working with. So all these topics are very dear to my heart. I mean, they've come because of my own background in the workplace. And it's really exciting to me that I can, hopefully make a difference to some of my clients in these areas that to me are so, so important and fundamental.
And I'm so glad that you've shared that, because I feel like it's nicely opening to the final part of the podcast, which is around recommendations. For example, what you've shared about how you came across to focus on the empathy side of things, I feel like it's a nice reminder. And I think it works both ways. So either for someone who is listening to this podcast, who is wondering, what on earth is going on with maybe someone in their team, they just don't have an understanding about where they are, they feel that the communication is broken. Well, maybe just stop for a second, take a step back and see how you can ask a different question next time you're meeting or seeing them, so you can have a genuine open conversation and maybe get to the root cause, because it might be nothing relating at all with work. It might be something going on in their personal life as well. But I feel like it also works if you're on the other side. And I see that sometimes with some of my clients. They feel like the communication, once again, is broken with the manager and they're not being seen for what they truly are. Then I would definitely highly encourage to pause and ask yourself, how can I actually convey the message differently? Not to say it has to be 100% on their shoulders, but what you shared when it comes to coming across the empathy, especially in the context of, bringing a much more equitable workplace, for example, has to work on all angles. And I feel like it's just a very nice reflection point that you've shared with us. So thank you very much for that. And anyone listening in, if this is something that you feel like you're stuck with, either personally or someone in your team or even someone that is there anything that you can share on that angle to bring more empathy and maybe lead a conversation in a different, hopefully more positive way and angle?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just literally a case of stepping back.
Mm-hmm.
And one tool or activity I really like, which is from Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now and The New Earth. He talks about when you're in a conversation with somebody and you're hearing something that will trigger you or evoke an emotional response, what you can do is imagine that your body is porous. You've got big holes in your body. And that energy that normally, let's say somebody says something and you disagree, normally we would immediately push back. Well, I disagree, or this is my opinion. But if you imagine that those big holes in your body, that energy passes through, the energy of the other person that you would normally be trying to push back to them, it passes through. So you can just literally be with somebody who is saying something that you really disagree with, or that you want to push back. And instead you can just be there, because that sort of charged energy is now gone. And it's being comfortable with disagreement, with sort of challenging topics, that sort of thing. It's being comfortable and relaxed in those scenarios that can make all the difference. So, I when I do keynotes and I talk about empathy, I always share that little tool with the audience, because it's so valuable. And I remember a while ago, there was some banging. I think I needed to record a video that day or something at home, and there was some banging and construction in the next building or the next, apartment. And I remember just thinking, okay, just, take some deep breaths, let this anger and aggravation and frustration, let it just pass through. I just kind of dropped this feeling of aggravation, and I was just comfortable. Okay, well, this is where we are at the moment. I can't do my recording. But instead of getting angry, it's like, okay, it's not going to be like this forever. Let me just hold on and we'll move through this. And I think just little tools like that, especially when people can get so angry so quickly or so frustrated these days, little things like that can really make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you've shared this one. Duly noted on my end as well. Any other recommendations that you'd like to share on that particular topic, or anything that comes to mind for any woman who's looking to make the most out of their career?
I would say that one thing that is really helpful is if you're in meetings, and there's a lot of data that shows that when women speak a lot in meetings, it works against them. Whereas when men do, it works for them, which is very unfair. But reading, I think it's The Authority Gap by Marilyn Seacart, I think her name is. And she talks about the fact that if we can cultivate the skill of being concise, on point, being really good at kind of getting to the nugget of what we're trying to share, getting to the kind of the real nub, that can really work in our favor. And people can start to look at us as, wow, whenever Anais speaks, she really summarizes so well, or she's so on point and clear with the way that she communicates. So, and I remember reading about, I think, a very senior police woman who, she originally early in her career, she'd try and speak, the men would talk over her, she would be disrespected. And she developed this skill of being very succinct, concise, to the point, great at summarizing. And that, she said, was really fundamental to helping her move up through the various levels to the very senior role that she now has. So even things like that, I mean, just making sure that you can be on point, you can be concise. It's not fair, that women should have to work on this more than men, but this is the world that we're in at the moment. So, hopefully this is a useful tip for you.
Great tip. I love it. Thank you. Anything else that you'd like to share, Shola?
There's a great book actually called I'm just looking it up as you tell, the Conflict Resolution Handbook. And I found it very helpful. It's called Conflict Resolution something. I'll give you the title and everything later. But that book, I mean, I'm someone who kind of was I did a master's degree, so I was sort of in academia for 3 years. But I like stuff that's just really direct, to the point. Just give me what I need. You can put the studies and things at the back, or in the appendix. Just give me the tools, right? Yeah. And this book I thought was very helpful in terms of setting up, how do you resolve conflict? Just thinking about different kinds of personalities that you might come across in the workplace, how to deal with them. So I think that's a very, very useful book for anybody who's in a kind of difficult, tough, challenging workplace with different personalities.
Amazing. Perfect. We have a nice reading list that anyone can have a look at. That is brilliant. As part of the tradition, I'd love to ask you one word that would summarize our conversation together today. What would you say?
I would say animated, actually. I would say that's probably the word I'd use. Nice. I've really enjoyed it. I like your energy, and it's been a nice chat. So thank you so much for that.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your expertise, for being honest, kind, vulnerable, all of these things all together. Great energy. Definitely, I would agree. So here's to an animated episode. Thank you so much, Shola.
Thank you, Anais. Thank you. Take care.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with anyone you believe would benefit from hearing it. Because as you know, life is too short to feel unfulfilled at work.